This is Catherine Coleman Flowers. She is an internationally recognized environmental activist, MacArthur Genius Grant recipient, and author. And her book is here. We're going to talk about it in a minute. It's called Waste. She has dedicated her life's work to advocating for environmental justice and primarily equality to clean water and functional sanitation for communities across the United States. Flowers is vice chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council and a member of the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force on Climate Change. She's founding director of the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice, and she's a board member of the NRDC, the Climate Reality Project, the Center for Constitutional Rights, and the American Geophysical Union. She's also a practitioner in residence at the Nicholas School of Environment at Duke University and co-chair of the American Academy of Art and Sciences Commission on Accelerating Climate Action. She is a very, very busy woman. So grateful that she's taken this time out to talk to us. I'm going to read one more and then I'm just going to talk. Catherine is fighting to reduce health, economic, and environmental disparities and to improve access to clean water and soil in marginalized rural communities. And she aims to influence policy, inspire innovation, drive research, and amplify the voices of community leaders, all in the context of changing climate. I'm just going to say this in one way. Catherine's work is at the intersection of climate justice, racial justice, poverty, eliminate. I mean, you're really at the center of so many things that intersect and they all work together. And not only that, not only do your issues work together, but the way you work, which I find super interesting, also brings everything together because you listen to grassroots, you listen to people, and then you work with local, community, state, government, also with businesses. I mean, you kind of bring everything together. You're at the center. And I think that's the kind of structural change we really need because your work is really, it's this sort of interconnected thing of how you work and also the issues that you address. So now I'm going to shut up. Oh, I have to do one thing. I have to read your intro because that Brian Stevenson wrote in your book, just to get that out because it's so good. Okay, our planet is dying. It is not a death from natural causes or some inevitable decline. Instead, we are slowly killing our future through greed, abuse of precious resources, reckless consumption, and irresponsible behavior. The environmental crisis, like most crises, will victimize the poor and vulnerable the most. In the United States, Black people, Indigenous people, and communities of color will bear the heaviest burden of avoidable disease, degraded life quality, and unnecessary suffering. This has sadly become the American story. And this is what you're addressing. So we're so grateful to have you here. Hi. You want to tell us about your life story? I know we don't have that long, but a little bit about what your book is about so people can get the idea.
Okay, well, first of all, the book is about waste, but it's really more autobiographical because it tells it pretty much tells I'm sorry, somebody's at the door. It tells my story of growing up in Lowndes County, Alabama, which is between Selma and Montgomery. It also is it also kinds of I used it as a background to talk about the environmental work that I do because oftentimes I always heard, "Why are you doing this?" So I felt in order for people to understand why I was doing this, that they need to understand my own life story. So I use that as a backdrop to talk about the environmental injustices that I've witnessed, but also how I came to become an environmentalist. And part of it's because I grew up in a rural community. I grew up in the country. And and I don't think you can grow up in rural communities without an appreciation for nature, an appreciation for the natural world. And out of that, combined with having activist parents and growing up around a time when our history was very terrible and unfortunate. It seems like we were reliving that history right now. But it was a big drive for people to have the right to vote and to get out and vote. And I was very moved as a child by what was happening at the time, including the death of Dr. King, the death of Robert Kennedy, um, the death of President Kennedy. I mean, I think I talk about that in the book. That was my first time really remembering seeing my father cry. Um, so all of that, I think, together has made me who I am today and has pushed me to become an advocate and an activist. And my education was as a teacher. So I feel that I'm doing the same thing. I'm just doing it in a different arena.
Mhm. Okay, well, can we start to address the issue of the sewage and the waste? Because I think many people who are listening to this don't really know the issue that we're addressing, and it's serious. What happened? I'm gonna say I happened to be in Montgomery when I think the first article came out. Maybe I saw it. I can't remember the newspaper, but I think you could address what happened, and it was a shock, the hookworm. So,
So I actually moved back to Alabama in 2000, and my first job I worked with the NAACP Voting Empowerment Project to get the first Black mayor of Selma elected. And from there, I started working doing economic development, and in the process found out that people in Lowndes County, I was working for the county commission, but found out that Lowndes County, people in Lowndes County were being arrested because they couldn't afford on-site septic systems. And the narrative from the health department at the time was that, you know, um, they couldn't afford them, or they were making other kinds of economic choices. And we wanted to learn more about this whole process. And ultimately, um, I wanted to do more. First of all, we stopped the arrest. And I think in the process of stopping the arrest, that's when Brian Stevenson learned about me because there was a lot of media around that. And I had started an
and
organization.
it criminalizes poverty. Really, you can't afford to fix
Yeah,
yourself.
these are very poor people. Lowndes County, Alabama is located between Selma and Montgomery, very rural. It's home of the original Black Panther Party, where people were organizing for the right to vote. And the name was actually given to the name was actually used again in Oakland, but the original Black Panther Party was a political party in Lowndes County, Alabama, and it was significant because it was supported by SNCC, the organized poor people who were former sharecroppers that wanted to vote, and it was also supported by um, the few Black people that were in the middle class, farmers and teachers that were in Lowndes County at the time. And from that history, Lowndes County has always been, I thought, of the 67 counties in the state of Alabama, it was a place that whenever the state decided it was going to retaliate against people for organizing, Lowndes County was that person. I'm sorry, I'm in Washington, D.C. This could be the president passing by with all the sirens I hear in the background. But anyway, because I'm not far from the White House. But um, most people that they were targeting to arrest were very poor. They were living in mobile homes. And the most they had was the land that everybody in Lowndes County prided themselves in trying to own. And then people wanted a house, they couldn't afford to build a house. So they bought a mobile home. If anybody know anything about a mobile home, once you pull it onto the property, it loses value. Once you buy it and take it off that lot, it loses value. It's just like a car. And you have to go in and get a title for it pay for the paperwork like you do for your car every year. So it's not a wealth generator. It actually keeps people poor, and most people are getting predatory loans. So we partnered with a national organization, and we stopped the arrests, because even when Bob Woodson came from D.C. and saw this, he said we had outlawed prisons for poor people, for people being poor, but in essence that seemed to be the approach that the state was taking. And so we were able to get a pause on them arresting people. And in that process, we decided to do a study where we collected fecal soil, water, and blood samples, because I had my own encounter where I was bitten by a mosquito. My body broke out in a rash, couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And I asked my physician, is it possible that There are diseases in America that American doctors are not trained to look for because, I was around raw sewage all the time. And I knew other people were living around raw sewage too. And she said yes. And shortly afterwards, I read an op-ed that was written in the New York Times by Dr. Peter Hotez at Baylor School of National Medicine. And I Googled him, found an email address, and wrote him about Lowndes County, what was there. And we ended up having a conversation. And he said, every time I talk about these issues and tropical diseases being here, they want to blame it on immigration. I said, I can take you to a place where people probably hadn't been to Atlanta, let alone out of the country. So they can't blame it on that. And when I explained the landscape, he said, we're going to look for hookworm. So he sent his parasitologist, and we collected fecal, blood, water, and soil samples. We found evidence using PCR technology of hookworms, strongyloides, and other tropical parasites. And these are these are intestinal parasites that were signatures for, they had to come from feces. Um, so consequently, the story, when we found this out, it had to be peer reviewed. It took 3 years. That's why it was 2017 when it came out. But we decided to let a global newspaper break the story, and that's why the Guardian broke the
Guardian,
story.
that's the one I read, the Guardian story.
Yeah, yeah, that's why the Guardian broke the story because, I was having a hard time from 2002 up until that point to even convince Americans that this was a problem here in the United States because everybody assumed it's a problem in other parts of the world.
Parts of the world, and no one thought there'd be hookworm here. I mean, that's, yeah. Now, can I go back and ask you one question? I don't think
Okay, yeah.
many people who are on this chat don't really know about like how expensive it is. Like if you have a trailer or house and you don't, and you're, can you explain the whole septic thing, how that works? Because people don't understand. Like you have to pay for that yourself. It's not, the government doesn't supply you with that, which I had no.
Yeah, the septic systems are very expensive in a place like Lowndes. And now we're finding out, I gotta say with this caveat, we're finding out that this is a problem around the country and around the world. Even in Malibu, the houses in Malibu, a lot of them are on septic systems. So septic systems are very expensive. And in poor communities, they can cost, in a place like Lowndes, they can cost upwards of 20. The last one we tried to purchase, it cost over $20,000 because the water tables are high, and the water tables are going to get higher because of climate change and sea level rise. So that was one problem. People couldn't afford them, and then people that had them, because in our study we had people that had septic systems, and they also had hookworm, but they were straight. With the people that had septic systems, the sewage was running back into their homes or into the yards because they're failing. That's the other part of this that we've since found out. The septic systems and sanitation systems are failing around the country. So there's very likely that it's not just people in Lowndes County with hookworm and tropical parasites. It could be anyone, anywhere somebody's living on a failing septic system. So my trip yesterday, I was in Albany, New York,
Uh-huh.
with the state legislature. They were celebrating Earth Day, and and the irony is that everybody I talked to, whether they were in Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens, or upstate New York, in rural counties, we're talking about sanitation issues. They're failing everywhere.
Does the government not have responsibility to, I mean, I mean, how does that, when a city, like, they have to, what are the rules around that? I find that like, I mean,
Well, we're finding that the government has just looked the other way in a lot of communities.
okay,
Because we were hearing this yesterday in New York City,
in New York,
from people representing New York City in the General Assembly and in the Senate. But even in California, I mean, I just joined a board for an organization that that's been put together at UCLA because the state of California doesn't know how many people in the state, first of all, are on septic, and second, have failing systems or no systems at all. This is a problem in all 50 states and U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. It is not, when we first started doing this work, nobody was talking about waste. But I think that one of the things that came of this is that, especially writing a book and getting the MacArthur Award, other people that were looking at their problems with waste and thought that they were simply having a plumbing issue realized it's a bigger issue than that. And with septic systems, when you buy them and put them in the ground, the liability is automatically transferred to the homeowner. So, in my view, that is not an incentive for the manufacturers to make something that is sustainable and resilient.
I was shocked at the price. I mean, I just had no idea, and I can imagine how, you're trying to live and you can't even afford to have clean
Proper sanitation. And,
sanitation.
and, and
So
we're,
that's
when
actually
we're
things that people should have in the United States of America everywhere. I mean, that's like kind of a basic right. I mean, kind of, right? I mean, the right to flush your
Well,
toilet.
that I know with the UN has a group of sustainable development goals, and these sustainable development goals, the purpose of it is to eliminate poverty, and I think it's sustainable development goal number 6 is the human right to water and clean water and sanitation,
Okay.
and this is a problem. I can just tell you based on my travels. Last year I was in Hawaii. I didn't know that most homes in Honolulu own septic tanks and they're failing. They're going into the water table. They're causing fish kills and algae blooms. Um, you find, and they're going to replace, well, they're calling them cesspools. They're replacing with septic tanks. The septic tanks are failing. We heard that yesterday in New York. We know that we've been to Florida. Same thing there. They're having problems. A couple of weeks ago, we were at the Colonias. The Colonias, for those that don't know, is the area along the border from Texas to California,
Mhm.
where a lot of people of Hispanic descent live, and they're living in these poor conditions. And when we went there, we were invited there by a group of people that work in that region with EPA. So we went to South Texas, and we thought we were going to hear people talking about housing issues, land issues. They were talking about sanitation. That's the first thing they talked about.
Wow.
Everywhere, people are complaining about the lack of sanitation because they don't have sanitation. And you can imagine what kind of issues, health issues, could be emanating there. And I believe that if we do not address this infrastructure issue as it relates to sanitation, we'll continue to poison our water with human feces. We continue to contaminate the land with human feces. Um, we're getting to a point where these diseases that we thought could happen somewhere else because of the lack of having the proper infrastructure can happen here in the US, and not just in rural communities and not just in poor communities.
So if people can't afford, obviously, to necessarily fix their septic tanks because the prices are astronomical, what are some solutions you're working on? And also, what are the, because back to this intersectionality, like, is it local government, state governments, federal government? Is there policy? Is there,
It's going to take, first of all, there is money. The Biden administration, I got to give them credit for this because they've acknowledged that this is a problem. The first administration in the history of the US since I've been doing this work, that's acknowledged that this is a problem. And they have set aside funding. There's $6 billion to put in place water and sanitation infrastructure through EPA. In addition to that, uh,
billion,
they've expanded they
billion?
expanded the closing the wastewater access gap, which initially was for 11 rural counties, and now it's 150. So
Oh,
they're making the effort, and part of the money needs to come from. But when the money goes, it's going to the state, and the state has to be on board. And you're in a state that's not on board, that cares more about embryos than they care about, people, then that's a problem. Um,
know what states that?
and yeah, so that's a problem. Some states are not on board. So there has to be an entity, a local entity that this money can go through, and it would have to come through the state. Um, the other thing that we're working on besides changing policy around this and getting money allocated, our organization, the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice, has been working on innovation. We were initially founded in Lowndes County, located in Montgomery. Now we've moved to Huntsville, Alabama. The reason we moved to Huntsville, Alabama, is because the NASA Space Flight Center is there. The Marshall Space Flight Center, what Marshall does is they keep the astronauts alive, and they have to deal with sanitation issues on this, on these space missions as well. They've learned how to treat urine and turn this urine into drinking water. They haven't learned what to do with the solids yet. So we're looking to work with innovative aerospace engineers working in that space, along with bringing together people from when we went to the colonias, and last week we were in Barbados. What we saw was ingenuity of local people
Like what
who
kind of?
who have created ways that may not be something that can be permitted, but they have created ways to deal with wastewater. So we want to bring together people that with that type of innovation, along with young people who are engineers. We have some PhD engineers, young people that are working with us, as well as aerospace engineers, for the purpose of creating something new and different, a new way to treat wastewater, because this is not going to get better. It's going to get worse because of climate change. And until we start creating, because if as long as you can buy a septic tank and put it in the ground, and the liability is automatically transferred to the homeowner, there is no incentive for the manufacturers to build something new and different. And that's what we're going to do. We're not waiting for anybody else. We've decided we're going to do it ourselves.
I mean, you found such a problem so local and it's so expansive and it's everywhere. And I know we don't have much time left, but I want to ask you about the end part of your book, because another part that this affects, the part of the very end about what happened with COVID, because I think we should address that these same areas I'll let you go from that part, the very end of your book. You want to bring that up because I think it's
So the people that what happened during the pandemic is that places like Lowndes County had the highest death rate per capita for COVID than any other area. And one of the persons that I wrote about in the book that I was working with at the time ended up passing away from COVID. And we had so many deaths from COVID during the height of the pandemic, especially 2020, before the vaccines, that Lowndes County per capita had the highest death rate in the state of Alabama. But also keep in mind that now one way in which has come out of this, that they test to see the infection rate in cities. They test wastewater. They test wastewater looking for all kinds of diseases now. And the people are being exposed to this, along with all the other things that they're being exposed to. We have a big problem on our hands, and we need to address it. But I do feel confident that at least policymakers in some states and also on the federal level are hearing us now.
so
And
the
we're working with them to try to find some meaningful solutions.
it's federal money that can be released to the states if the states want to do it and not do other things. So we know which states are more likely to want to do it. So everyone has to. Um, and can you bypass a state? So say you're in Alabama and there's a different, go directly to the local governments, or it doesn't work that way?
We're trying to see, is there a way in which it can go to other entities? I know that when we were in the colonias recently with people from EPA and other government entities, because the colonias is unique just from there, even in California, because they're unincorporated. So to find another way in which the funds can get to the community to provide the infrastructure that's necessary for them to be able to deal with this issue.
Wow.
So people are actively looking at it. We have people from the academic community that are trying to figure out how to solve this problem. People now from everybody that we talked to. When we were actually yesterday, I was recognized by the Senate in New York State, as well as by their General Assembly, and everybody we're talking to, especially in rural communities, acknowledge this issue and are trying to find ways to deal with it.
But do people in cities also have septic, or is it just rural? I mean, you said
Some cities have septic. I mean, in Miami, a lot of the homes are on septic. In Honolulu, they're on septic. There's some parts of Los Angeles County, people are on septic. That was the cheapest way to build and not connect to the centralized sanitation. And now that we found that they're simply not working. And keep in mind that the American Society for Civil Engineers has given the United States a D minus for sanitation infrastructure.
minus?
Yes. I think the problem is we have not put forth the monies that's necessary to design this type of systems that work. In cities like Mount Vernon, New York, where we've also had to bring attention to what was happening there, sewage was running back into people's homes.
Yeah.
And that was largely because the system that was built in Mount Vernon, you got to remember, New York was one of the first parts of what is now the United States. Some of those pipes were wooden pipes.
Wooden?
Yes.
Wow.
That the early settlers built when they started to build those cities.
Oh, yeah. I know they've never been replaced in hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you have time for a couple questions?
Oh, of course.
Laura says, "Hi, Catherine. Wondering what you think the relationship to the UN Declaration of Human Rights is to your work/US policy. Is it simply informative?"
What do I think of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does that
I think that the UN Declaration of the Human Right to Water and Sanitation has been very important to my work, because when I was doing this work, I wasn't getting any traction in the U.S. We actually had to invite the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty to come to Lowndes County, and when he came to Lowndes County as part of his official visit, he addressed that. And the irony is, when he made his report to the UN in Geneva, and I happened to be there, was the date that the Trump administration decided, the day before they decided that they were going to leave the UN Human Rights Council. So when this report was being made, he started off, and the choice of words that Nikki Haley used when she left the Human Rights Council, they called it a cesspool. So
No.
they really set the stage for the special rapporteur. When he gave his report, he started his report off, and I talk about it in the book. He started his report off talking about Lowndes County, and he said, "Government, do your job," because there've been so, because of the work that we did through the UN. There's so many news organizations from around the world that want to come and interview us. There's one that's coming next month that is from Italy, that want to come and report this, because people cannot believe that this is happening in the U.S. because we're just the richest country in the world. But we're the richest country in the world.
I feel like this is the government for me. I mean, what do I know? But this is like an issue the government should be dealing with. Like people should not be having raw sewage outside their houses or inside.
And people should have clean water to drink. I mean, we're still dealing with issues in Flint. We're still dealing with issues in Jackson, Mississippi, and there are other Jacksons and there are other Flints. But yet, there is a human right to water and sanitation.
Yeah.
And the only state that has adopted that is California. But even with them trying to do the right thing, there's still people that are slipping through the cracks. But at least they have a plan in place to try to identify folk so they can start dealing with it.
Such important work. Do we have one more question?
Yes.
One more question.
It says, Laura again says, "Can you also say more about your work with Indigenous communities to learn from and to support that learning?"
Okay. So a lot of Indigenous communities are in the same situation. They don't have access to, some of them don't have access to water, clean water. And then there are others, many that don't have access to sanitation. There's still Indigenous communities that don't have access to electricity. We even saw people when we went to the colonials, some of those people are also Indigenous, and they didn't have access to electricity either. In terms of my work with Indigenous communities, I have first of all accepted my own indigeneity because I have Indigenous DNA. But I spent some time when the election happened in 2016, I actually spent time getting grounded by going to Standing Rock at the time. And I spent time in Standing Rock learning about what was happening there with the fight over water, and working with some of my friends who are indigenous activists, trying to elevate that issue. And then, of course, since then, working with the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary, I've learned a lot more about indigenous wisdom, because that's what one of the things that they do is bring people together, especially from the religious community, along with community organizers, to learn about indigenous wisdom and knowledge, and how we can incorporate that as we talk about water, and the fact that water is sacred and water is life. Because there are people that are trying to make water a commodity, and that goes against indigenous wisdom.
I'm going to tie things up at the end of your book. We had an earlier talk. You brought Indigenous up with Barbara Alice Mann, who's a academic who writes about really about Iroquois women, but she's written, I think, 19 books all about Indigenous, really what we can learn from Indigenous societies, particularly these matriarchal, where I thought about the Iroquois. But I'm going to mention this because this is the end of we were talking about the Iroquois Confederacy, and the very end of your book, because I love when there's things that connect as you connect. Connect. To the very end of your book, I'm going to quote you. You say, this is great symmetry. This is going to make me cry because it connects so well. But I think often of the 7th generation philosophy attributed to the Iroquois people. It holds that when we make important decisions, we must think not of ourselves, but rather of the children to come. We should think ahead for 7 generations. Those 7 generations and more depend on what we do today.
Exactly.
So
I'm a grandparent, and the work that I do now, not just around sanitation, but also around climate, is because I want to make sure that there's a livable future, not for myself, but for the 7th generation.
Me too, and that's everything I want for my children and my future grandchildren. Hopefully, I'm so grateful for this conversation. I mean, you're a hero of mine, heroine. I just cannot believe we got to have it. It got to fit into your schedule because I know you're so busy with everything you're doing. Thank you so much for being here. It means so much to all of us. So much to learn from. And you guys, this is the book, but you have 2 websites, right? People want to get information about you.
Yes, they can actually go to www.creej.org, and they can also go to the website for the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice. My personal website. I'm also accessible through, as you know, through social media. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, Facebook. So generally when people reach out to me, I do respond. The book is available on Amazon. I have a new book that's coming out. That book will be coming. It's called Holy Ground. It also talks about my indigenous history, and I connect it to a lot of other things that are happening on the social justice front. And that book is coming out in January. And Jill, I look forward to seeing you in person when I go to LA.
I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. This meant so much to me. We're excited about your new book. Everyone get this book before. I mean, it's just eye-opening to learn that people fucking can't flush their toilets in the United States of America. It's shocking. And we have a lot to do. Thank you so
We have
much.
a lot to do.
Our grandchildren.